Doreen, I want to make a permanent cooperation with the Dalai Lama to make Eurasia happen, and you do it.
We see reality according to our thought. Wherever you look, it's the product of thought. Buildings, farms, airplanes, everything, pollution. And therefore, thought is constantly participating both in giving shape and form and figuration to ourselves and to the whole of reality, right?
I think reality, of course, this whole is interdependent. See, without, in order to exist something, one particular thing, see, without other factor, it cannot exist. So you see, everything related.
The faster, the quicker, the people in the developed countries are taught to understand that it is really in their interest to reduce poverty in the world. The faster our planet will be able to solve that issue.
That they would realize that we're just on this little ball here, and everything that we do, because we have been very extravagant in our developments, that everything that we do makes a difference here and there and everywhere.
Well, you see, I think the difficulty is this fragmentation, first of all. Everybody is, all thought is broken up into bits, like this nation, this country, this industry, this profession, and so on, as they can't meet, right? And it's extremely hard to break into that. Now, the second, but that comes about primarily because thought has developed traditionally in a way such that it claims not to be affecting anything, but just telling you the way things are. Therefore, people cannot see that they are creating a problem and then apparently trying to solve it. That is, see, let's take the problem, what problem do you like? Pollution, or the ecology. See, the ecology is not in itself a problem. It works perfectly well by itself. It's due to us, right? It's a problem because we are thinking in a certain way by breaking everything up and each person's doing his own thing, right? Now, therefore, the ecological problem is due to thought, right? But thought thinks it is a problem out there and I must solve it. Now, that doesn't make sense because simultaneously thought is doing all the activities which make the problem and then does another set of activities to try to overcome it. You see, it doesn't stop doing the things which are making the ecological problem, right? Or the national problem, or whatever the problem is.
Buddhists believe the oneself as a creator. So, the future, the good or bad, entirely depend on present, our, shoulder. It entirely, depend on our own, present, behavior, or present action.
The earth is one household, really.
Yeah.
We're not treating it that way, right? So that's the first step in economics, is to say the earth is one household and all that it depends on. It's all one, you see.
You cannot avoid the question whether the kind of society which exists now is coming to an end. Not only socialism, communism, whatever you call it, but also the Western type of society. No existing society is not only perfect at any given time, but the question is whether it is adequate. There's a lot of groping for power, fighting for power, a lot of cynicism. Now, when I'm thinking about our leaders, I think, why not bring in more intellectuals, scientists, spiritual leaders? I think that we should put in charge more people who are able to look far ahead, who are creative. I don't think it is so dangerous that these people are not professional politicians. I think it's quite good. And chances are that at least most of these people will be decent, particularly people of art. These people, they come to understand quicker than others something that will happen in the future. They even may not know this, you know. But by what Rauschenberg was doing, you know, just spilling water and, you know, paintings. This is some sign of the future. He feels things that will be coming.
Or the root of the word compassion is said to feel together. And if people have the same feeling together and are responsible for each other, then you have compassion.
And you don't think it's part of, what's the word, original sin, that human beings in their very nature compete?
Well, I don't think that there is such thing as original sin, and I think it has developed more and more with the growth of our society. That there's no evidence that people in the hunter-gatherer society were all that competitive, but the more you made society big and you had organization and you had to get to the top, the people on the bottom would suffer. There was a drive to compete, naturally.
And do you think that perhaps the desire to compete is a weakness?
Not a weakness, that's a mistake.
Right.
I think that's one of the biggest dangers. I think that's what drives countries and nations apart is a sense of competition.
I think this is really where the difficulty is, that we have got to see that thought is part of this reality. So the first thing we have to do in the long run is to look at our whole way of thinking, which has developed over so many thousands of years. I don't think it was the original way of thinking of the human race at all, but for many complex reasons it came about. Now, that means that people have to make they have to participate, to make a cooperative effort to have a dialogue, a real dialogue in which we will not merely exchange opinions, but actually listen deeply to the views of other people without resistance. And we cannot do this if we hold to our own opinion and resist the other. It doesn't mean we should accept the other, but we have to be able to look at all the opinions as suspended, as it were, in front of us without carrying them out, without suppressing them.
The excitement has always been, you know, for the separation and checking out the differences, and that's why you said that competition thing. And I think that there is a new conscience of realizing that this world has its own limitations. I mean, this is not heaven. I mean, it's not hell either, but you know, this is not heaven. And this is the only place that we can be on.
Now, I tried to get some idea of what might be the process which was implied by the mathematics of the quantum theory. And this process is what I call enfoldment, that the mathematics itself suggests a movement in which everything, in which any particular element of space may have a field which unfolds into the whole, and the whole folds and enfolds into it. Right? So you have this movement, and I call this the implicate or enfolded order, which unfolds into the explicate order where everything is separate. Now, the implicate order, everything is internally related to everything. Everything contains everything, right? So everybody has many experiences of this implicate order. The most obvious one is ordinary consciousness, where consciousness enfolds everything that you know or see, right? And now, it doesn't merely enfold the universe, but also you act according to that content. So therefore, you are internally related to the whole. In this sense, you act according to your consciousness of the whole. So you're not acting mechanistically in the sense of being pushed and pulled by objects in the surroundings.
I think that we're going in entirely the wrong direction, looking for coherence. I think that the world was not designed to make any sense whatsoever. And I think it's been very good at it.
It has to be diverse and it has to be anarchic.
And original. Original to each person.
We have a tremendous resistance to acknowledging incoherence. People are constantly saying everything is all right, there's nothing to worry about. You know, this is all very coherent. That totalitarian regimes are constantly doing that, saying everything is wonderful. That's the key point, to attend to incoherence, first acknowledge it and then begin to do something about it.
It has to go in waves, I must say. It has to go in waves, you know. There's a time...
Everything is in waves, he says.
No, I said there's a time for anarchy and there's a time for order. Order creates anarchy and anarchy creates order.
And are we...
And it goes in waves.
Waves create erosion.
I think that the incoherence has become more dangerous because of the scale of our society and because of technology. That we have all sorts of dangers, such as nuclear war, biological war, chemical war, destruction of nature. Probably we can think of 4 or 5 others which are brought about by our power. You see, now, the greater power we have, the greater we need coherence. The question, to my mind, is the human being capable of dealing with this situation which he himself has produced?
I think we all, you see, I think this come from human being. You see, whether scientist or whether you see the economist or artist, when we're born, we are same human being. And I think it's the same desire. You see, same, I think, inner feeling. Then, you see, follow it's a different profession way. And then sometimes, you see, as a fragmentation somewhere. Fragmentation. Now you see, sometimes people call specialist. So when you see you become specialist, then your outlook, something become very small. So you see, that time I think there is danger. You see, to forget about the wholeness. The things are, everything is related. So if something wrong here, it affect there. So everything, you see, I think pursued it by desire of happiness. So that's the basic human nature. Now, when we return on that level, we can solve this problem. This is I feel. So this is I usually call spiritual, not necessarily something which is dogmatism. Without accept or believe, you see, these, complicated thing. Just to simply be a good-hearted person.
And I was thinking, when you talked about the wholeness, I was thinking about the necessity of a new world order. We need a new world order, and the world order is not one country being a policeman, but the world order is, hopefully as a result of this, the end of a false competition between communism and the other kinds of society, we can have a world order in which we're all together, we and America and Europe and Japan and Tibet and China and all the other countries and all the animals. It's they who provide us with life, isn't it true?
Yes.
Well, no plants, there wouldn't be any life. We have to think about these things in the spirit of wholeness and also in the spirit of His Holiness.
In patriarchal societies, people frequently talk about human nature when they really mean male human nature. That's a very frequent confusion. And I think this discussion this morning about competition is a good example of a question that we cannot expect it to be solved by an all-male panel.
If you give up the idea of competition, then there is no difference.
You mean to imply that there's no competition between women? The idea is about this.
I put the question to you, is there no difference between the matriarchal and the patriarchal society?
Only in Italy.
Well, the question is more subtle. The whole subject is much more subtle than that.
Can't hear you.
Of course it's subtle.
And it would take some time, and it would take, half the panel being women to really go into it.
Well, there's
no hope we can solve it in this context.
Yeah, okay.
We're running into Lawrence Wiener. We're running into a major difficulty here. My distinguished colleagues on the panel and most of the audience have taken for granted from the beginning and the inception of this symposium that there is already an agreed upon idea of what is harmony.
Yep.
This agreed upon idea of what everybody is accepting for being polite, being conventional, and so on and so forth, has inherently within its structure a problem about the relationships of biological males and biological females. And until we start to question essentially what the results of the life's work of David Bohm is, what the results of the life's work of all of our distinguished panelists are, which is that there is at any given time 4 or 5 simultaneous realities that are not hierarchical but are dangerous to some members of the society, we're not going to get anywhere.
But if culture, to use your definition, if culture is shared meaning, hasn't that sharing to be universal?
It has to be. I mean, evidently we have a split which has developed over thousands of years, and we're not understanding each other now as to what is meant by order and harmony. So we can't proceed very far.
Meet here. For gathering is the meet, yeah?
For this moment.
Only.
Here, for this moment.
For this moment.
Group.
Yeah, this group only here for this moment, yes.
The postmodern mind is a mind that has no comprehensive view of reality, and it is taking its cue from science, which has no imageable view of the way nature happens.
The conversation is about the fact of the reality of the society as we see it now on the table, presented by people who are quite capable. We have people who risk madness by trying to make themselves good people. We have people who risk imprisonment by making deals that are not to be made. We are taking artists who risk madness as well by making and objectifying time.
Can we sail the sea of life without a compass and still reach compassion?
During 15 years of teaching religion and philosophy at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Houston Smith's hypothesis was thoroughly tested. An epistemology that aims relentlessly. Biologist Ilya Prigogine is sometimes referred to as the poet of thermodynamics. He works at the borderline of living and non-living matter, exploring irreversible non-linear processes, which radically changes our view on space and time.
Chaos is a type of order. It's a type of unstable order in which the temporal sequences are very complex. You see, our classical idea was that molecules are colliding at random, like dust particles. How would they produce coherence? And now we see that non-equilibrium can produce coherence, can produce structures, can produce very complex patterns, and which permit us to see, to understand, I would say, much better the type of structures which we see in the world around us. You need more anarchy in your terms, you see. You need more various activities, more multiple views.
There are many more that can be, many more answers. And each one of us can perhaps discover his own answer. It won't be a single answer. There's no longer a mainstream in art. There are 1,000 ways to go. Or not 1,000, it's just too small a number. I think we have a great difference from one person to another. And we don't all have the same experience. And it's through Duchamp that we know that it's the observer or the person who pays attention who finishes the work of art. So nothing is done until each one of us does it. And then it's done in a very unique way.
Dream. Let's have everybody's own solution. I had always the impression that one of the main purpose of this type of Indian sculpture was to try to reconcile the opposites, to go beyond the contradictions. And here the problem is a contradiction between the eternity and time, between the absolute and the relative. As well known, this is Vishnu, who is sleeping. His wife keeps him alive. He's sleeping on the snake, which separates the world of eternity from the world of activity of man. And from his navel, there is Brahma arising, and Brahma is the active principle of the world. And therefore the world, in a sense, is a realization of the dream of Vishnu. And when Vishnu will wake up, then this world will be destroyed, and another world will start, and another realization of the universe will start. So it is, in a sense, like to say that the reality is the dream of the absolute. To call the unknown and perhaps the unknowable God or not is finally for me a matter of secondary importance. What is really important is to feel not alienated in this universe.
Who was it said yesterday that we must think of the whole thing as one household? I mean, is that it? Is it a household that we look after, the human race? Sir, I'm asking you. Yes.
I've lost the issue. I don't know what the issue is. If you're saying, is the issue looking after the universe?
Looking after first of all, the people and their environment.
Oh, that's
I think the universe is taking care of itself. I mean, besides, it's an awful, we're in the universe. I mean, we're on a spaceship. I mean, there's no need to take another spaceship and go someplace else and screw that up, too. I mean, why don't you just stay here and take care of your garden?
And time is really, as Eddington once wrote, the bridging point between spirituality and matter.
More than on anything else, the future of civilization depends on how the two most powerful forces in history, namely science on the one hand and religion on the other, how these two most powerful forces in history settle into relationship with each other.
Air is not good to breathe. At the same time that we're in the presence of technological magic. It's very strange. And those paradoxes, which are not for the mind, but are paradoxes in daily life, perhaps give rise to an art that has no place, doesn't give you any place to rest.
It's a pity John Cage isn't here. When he said the future isn't here yet, I would like to ask him, would you like it to be a child again? But now I've changed my question somewhat. And what's the birth of a child nowadays? Is it a reproduction of labor, or more increase the ecological disaster? Is it an act of creation, or is it maybe just an example, an expression of time?
Dr. Christians, would you dissuade people from adding to the population?
I think the population, this morning it was already an indication that we have now 5 billion people, that we will have 10 billion people. And in my feeling, that will create, and that makes necessary to look for a complete new understanding for togetherness. For togetherness, that means what kind of behavior, what role will play technology, what role will play science, and what role will play the economy and the management of the economy. In other words, that must be an integrated formula.
I think that we tend to behave better when we think well of ourselves. I think that science in the last 3 centuries has reduced our self-esteem. Every man and woman senses what the mystics called the ground of our being, something that is greater within us than our finite selves. when this ultimate component in our being breathes through our intellect, it is genius. When it breathes through our will, it is virtue. And when it flows through our hearts, it is love. It is real. It is not nostalgia. If we have lost the power to sense it, that is a brutality that somehow modernity has inflicted on us. In Christian terminology, he who seeketh his or her life in egoistic grasping loses it, and those who can step out of their own light and cease to identify themselves simply with their private interests, they find life. One of the most appalling things is the savings and loan scandal, where I've heard the estimates $50 million diverted by wise people who knew the economy and channeled it off into their own pockets. And chemical companies selling biological weapons to Iraq, knowing that that's where it was going to. You know, we are a flawed species. The Australian Aborigines, the American Indians, all traditional cultures hold that the world is basically a spiritual habitat, that it is infused with spirit, that it emanates from a source that is wondrous, mysterious, greater than we are, and by rub-off from this origin, the world itself is, Max Weber used the phrase, an enchanted garden. And every little stone, leaf, reflects the glory, one might say, of the Great Spirit or the ultimate mystery.
Rousseau said, all nature is a harmony. That always seemed to me a dubious proposition. Are we now of the opinion that nature is not a harmony?
No, there's a harmony in chaos.
Chaos is such a misunderstood word. You see, for many people, chaos means disorder. Curiously, chaos, as studied in modern science, and many people speak of the new science of chaos, chaos is a type of order. It's a type of unstable order in which the temporal sequences are very complex.
The Roman emperor has this crown made of laurel leaves. So Lorraine is the one with the laurel leaf crown.
carrying or wearing the laurel leaf.
And spirituality is really a whole way of life, and it's really quite natural and spontaneous. And the more natural and spontaneous and unselfconscious it is, the better it is. And in other eras in history, people were more naturally and spontaneously spiritual. Spirituality is just an inevitable part of being human. And societies in the world today that are more primitive, as people would say, are definitely spiritual societies. It's westernized, industrialized society that's having difficulty living a so-called spiritual life.
In the Buddhist tradition, which is one of the reasons I'm so interested in it, is that the Buddhist tradition had made its own discovery of this groundless nature of human reality, that you cannot rely on some absolute truth or absolute judgment, that every form of knowing or every form of ignorance is contextual. The interesting thing about the Buddhist tradition is that they warn you from the very beginning that if you don't pay attention, if you don't have a profound work on what is it for you in your life to confront that lack of foundation, you're going to fall into the pitfall of that nihilism. Confronting this lack of foundation immediately makes it essential and points to the need for a human practice, for a human learning, for a human transformation into that. It is not enough to know it. It is not enough to understand it. It is not to have a scientific theory of it. We have to grow into it. The need to understand the immaturity with which we are born, to confront it, because maniacally we want to solidify things, maniacally. So when you understand that you have no ground and yet you are maniacally solidifying it, you begin to lead a life that is completely strange. Causality for the common mind is out there, is out in the world. That causality also applies to your own mind. That is, what you know and what you ignore is also a matter of an internal dynamics, of an internal causal pattern. And even the experimental psychologist, when he closes the door, usually the attitude is you close the door of the lab, you go home and you forget about it, right? Then you behave as if you had a very solid self. And you have very neat dogmatic ideas about what is right and what is wrong, and how to avoid the awareness of death and the awareness of aging and the pain of others and so on and so forth.
No more consciousness than consciousness in the moment. So then in one day or in 1 week you can say, but it's only the top of our being. I see the sun is now and I see everything, table, and I'm sitting here and I can see my fingers. That's the top.
Jacques is calling himself a visual artist, and what he does, we look at with our eyes. We're not just seeing with our eyes, and we're not just seeing because of what the brain does. We're seeing with the whole body. And I so appreciate Jacques as an artist because he says, well, you know, for years I didn't do art, and I don't even know if I'm an artist, because he's a person first. And that's what is most important, is that we meet as persons, not as categories. And if I get locked into the monk box, that's terrible, because I just happen to be a monk. I mean, that's a form that expresses something that's much more fundamental to me. And this also has a lot to do with perception, because if you're out there thinking monk, then you have all these preconceptions, and then I can't be who I really am, and I'm just Tessa. And you don't want to just sit here listening to talking boxes. And then you have to be able to make some kind of a connection in your own life. That's the point of our coming together. And what will Pinheiro, as the representative of the economy, learn about what it means to be a person from all these different perspectives, so that as a man of great influence in the world, and let's face it, The people who have the greatest influence here are all the people from the corporations. They have the money, they have the power. I have no power. I can make gestures. It's all very lovely, it's all very poetic. Francisco has no power. He has to depend on support of other people. Jacques has no power. But the power is in the hands of...
see what we call color is not at all the way other species see it. You see, it's easy for human beings to understand that different cultures have a different view of what, say, beauty or justice is. And we have no problems in accepting that we live in a multiverse of social constructs. What I'm trying to show with this research is that this multiversality carries on all the way down to how you feel, how you perceive. That when you see a color, which is identical for all human beings, there is completely cross-cultural. Nevertheless, that is proper to humans. Now, birds, mind you, have another dimension of color. That is, it's not that they see more colors. It's not that they see better colors. It's that their color space is unimaginable for us. Yet we're all walking around the canal there. We're all sharing something we can call a common ground. But this common ground is not something that it is pre-given. Each one of us has actually made it into a proper world. It's a multiversality. So ground is a very feminine quality of making something possible, instead of being a very masculine quality of the out there that you have to fit into. You see?
I have been listening to the three other panel members, and I understand that one of the objects of this meeting is to have us, them three or us four, bare our souls to you. Well, I shall do so within limits. But my life is the humdrum kind of life that one gets up in the morning, goes to the office, goes back home, and I happen to go to the office when it's dark, and I go home when it's dark, and it's there all the time, and Saturdays and Sundays it goes on all the time. It gets to the point, as you said, these, what do we call them, workaholics, or dreadful people that they are, they don't know what they are talking about. They can only learn something when they go out to play, as I'm doing. You go and throw these sort of balls of snow at the other one and you enjoy it. Well, I'm learning. But the only trouble is that if I learn too well, will I go back to my life? I have to, you know, I can't help it.
We see that we are not just here talking about what the problems are out there, but we're manifesting the problems. And And we haven't gotten very far yet. And we are hoping that today is going to be a turning point and that it's possible to get farther. And again, I just want to come back to what I began with, because today I feel that we're meeting as persons, and that's what makes the difference. We're not meeting out of our boxes. There's been an awful lot of talk about progress, and in the name of science, progress. And isn't this wonderful how far we've come? And now there's no more exploitation. Well, I don't see it that way. I think that there isn't a whole lot of progress. There's progress only on the material level. On non-material levels, I think we're less than barbaric. For example, this morning you talked about communications. Well, communications, what are all these communications systems if they don't lead to communion? And there isn't much communion, there's over-communication, which very often spoils communion between people. And Jacques has talked about, well, now we can read 6 newspapers and we can read 6 newspapers in a flash. Well, yes, you can, if all you're looking for is information. You can get information very fast, but life is more than getting information. Life is meeting, life is relatedness. And now another point you made was about how we've created all these desires in people all around the world because of our fabulous communications and our television sets. Well, for one thing, what we put on our television sets isn't even real. I mean, it's all a bunch of lies about how happy you're going to be if you drive this car or smoke this cigarette. So we talk about all these other countries, and we're going to give them all these material things, or we give them money, or we don't give them money. But what do these other peoples have to offer us that we may be lacking?
It's not just to express horror or to condemn the market economy. Most of the people are here because they are concerned. But to go a bit further and suggest how we can readjust this balance from the equation of democracy with consumerism, how we can improve the situation.
Your question is absolutely done right. And there are 20 different answers that each one has to give, and each one has to give the answer from the place where it's acting. What you are demanding is for a manager who is concerned about that, he's got to find ways of making his company responsible. We have to come back to put well-being at the center of the picture. And well-being is, first of all, knowing how to be well. And that's what we don't know. So the values of well-being have to be constantly reiterated and re-emphasized.
I certainly don't have any answers. I start with the questions as a businessman. And the questions are complex, and the questions are mind-boggling. But one thing I do know is that every single businessman here, or outside there, and in any country where she or he lives, is the product of his or her own society. So if there's any accusation of business being whatever it is, polluting, or not right with their employees, or looking only at producing their product, or whatever, that business is the mirror we started to talk about this morning of the environment in which they live. Where is the responsibility of a businessman? First of all, I'm getting a bit technical, but he uses other people's money. And the people who have given him the money pay their rents. So if he goes into this great adventure with other people's money, because he personally thinks that that's the way he should do it, and it goes bust, those other people cannot pay the rent. Problem.
What has the highest priority, your responsibility as a human being or your responsibility as a businessman? And you have to find that relation for yourself. If being a human being means that you have to think first of the people who made the investments possible, then you should do that. That's your conscience.
When our power has increased in such a way that we have produced those ecological, I should not call them disasters, imbalances, I think that business today on the global scale gets another dimension. And this dimension is inescapably linked with political issues, with moral issues, and with spiritual problems. So I think we'd like to disentangle and discriminate the intention of the business people and the business community from the intrinsic nature of business today, which due to these global proportions can only survive as business, disrupting the cosmic rhythms, for lack of a better word. And that, I think, is our problem. That's why the problem cannot be just solved by intimacy or just saying that we should all be good fellows and love one another. We have to translate that into another thing in which not only a changing economy, in which economy itself in its own radical fundamental conception perhaps now is bound to change.
I like that idea, but I hope it's possible.
As I look out on the world today, I see it with a very dark view. We call this in our community the dark night of the church. And times are quite dreadful, I think. And they call for tremendous heroism and tremendous self-sacrifice. Because what we really are about is to be giving to the world, not taking from the world. And that's part of the problem with the world today, is that there are too many people who are taking from it and not giving back to it, and not walking lightly on the earth, which is really what we're all called to do.
is not just material, and it's not an imprisoned situation where you have to sit in a studio and have to do something that you use all your concentration on. No, you can play on every level of life.
My job is not anything at all about showing a better way to live. It's about trying to determine what the hell is going on around us. It's not a matter of questioning or doubt or anarchy or any of these old-fashioned ideas. It's a matter of you have to determine what constitutes dignity for your own existence.
When you actually see birds flying in flocks in the air, when you see spiders instinctively spinning their webs, when you see flowers blooming in gardens, the scientific picture seems very two-dimensional. It seems to be leaving some essential feature of life out of the picture. I think there's a general and greater popular interest in biology because of the ecological and environmental problems. But at least in relation to Gaia, the living Earth, these things are closely related to physics, because ozone, the carbon dioxide effect, climatic changes are very much the physics side of what's going on. And I think what we're seeing really is that physics and biology are part of an integrated system of a living world in a living cosmos. Whereas previously they were separated rather radically. I mean, biology still, for the majority of its practitioners, is dealing with living machinery. Still regarding animals and plants as mere machines, living in an inanimate world governed by physics. I think this shift towards the idea of a living world in which physics and biology are both aspects of the living Earth and the living cosmos is what's going on at the moment. The question I'm dealing with is the question of how form and order come into being in living organisms and indeed in nature as a whole. The problem is to understand how a small egg grows into a complete organism, such as ourselves, or how an acorn grows into an oak tree. The standard view is that this is because there are chemical genes that program that development. But many developmental biologists have felt that's an inadequate view because all the cells have the same genes, and so something else must tell the genes what to do. The genes alone won't explain this process. There's an idea that's been around for at least 60 years, the idea of form-shaping fields, morphogenetic fields. And this idea of invisible fields which shape and guide the development of organisms is the starting point for my own ideas. What I'm saying, in effect, is that the form and the instincts of organisms are inherited as a kind of collective memory from past members of their species, and that this inheritance is not going through the genes, but is a non-material kind of memory. They tune in directly to past members of the species. It may be possible, I suppose, to tune into the memories of some particular person who's now dead and gain access to their memories. There is indeed some evidence that young children occasionally can remember, apparently, episodes from previous lives. Now, if they can remember things from previous lives, it could be that they're just tapping into those people's memories. It needn't necessarily prove that they are those people reincarnated. So I think this idea of morphic resonance enables us to understand that people could perhaps have memories of previous lives. It wouldn't necessarily prove that they are those people. that would depend on how you define a person, and that would lead into a whole area of philosophical debate.
I find the research of Sheldrake one of the most interesting things biologically that I've come across, because it also fits in completely with the Lamarckian theory that if you can in some way, manner or form enhance the quality of life of the human being, that quality of life's enhancement will pass on to the next aspiration. And also the end of the ivory tower concept, where if you are a scientist or an artist and you are sitting in your studio, which is what we do most of our lives, and you do push something to a point where you are confronting a reality that's different than a reality that you previously had, that this in some way adds to the genetic morphology of the world, that somehow or other you have changed the ontology of the world, that somebody then in Bangkok or in New Delhi or in Paris can basically come up with the same thing. I don't know how it works, and I want to believe, Rupert Sheldrake, that it works.
All of us are creatures of habit. We build up our own habits. We inherit cultural habits. I mean, for example, in our languages, we inherit the whole vocabulary. I mean, I haven't invented the English language. I've inherited it as a going concern. And the vast majority of words in it were already there when I was born, and more have been added since, but they're added quite slowly. And the basic habits, the metaphors, the implicit cultural understanding that goes with the language is a habit you inherit. So most of us inherit cultural habits. We build up our own personal habits. We have social habits. And our creativity happens against a huge background of habit. Creativity is always working against a background of habit. And if the creativity is successful, if it's useful or something that takes root and is repeated, then habits are something that grow out of creativity.
An observation that the artist as a person chose to spend their time studying or looking at the relationships of human beings to objects and objects to objects in relation to human being. And then that observation is presented, and that essentially is what art is. It can't change your life. It could destroy some of your dreams. What we are talking about is essentially how to build an economy, or to build a social system, or to build something that will hang in a non-symmetrical pattern, that will have a temporal unity, which is useful for our times, that is not using history in any way, manner, or form as an affirmative value judgment. And that's basically why I accepted the invitation, and that's why I'm here, is to try to figure out a way to raise a temporal unity, a temporal balance that is not based on Aristotelian principles, that does not accept the concepts as we know them and as our parents have told us of good and evil, that does not accept the consequences of the value of what a material is.
I am always dependent from many others. And it's probably one of the great strengths of the artists. They are independent. And I think it is a great luck for you, and it is a great achievement for a man to be completely independent. But I think that people like me and like all the people who are involved in economic life, they have not only the responsibility of behaving themselves correctly, and it's very difficult to know what means correctly, but also they keep in mind constantly the responsibility they have vis-à-vis the others. modern economy is based on liberal capitalism, and it's not at all an utopia, which by chance has proved to be successfully implemented. It is, on the contrary, the product of the creativity, the personal creativity of hundreds of millions of people through the history and all around the world, and it continues and it will evolve. First, it's absolutely unavoidable. But until now, we do not know yet where we are going to in the long run.
But I think that, for instance, in Europe, we have become too rich. We should stop getting more commodities and so on, because this is not what makes people happy.
So if we then say enough is enough, we don't need any more, how do we reach the point where everyone can say that? So far all we've achieved is some have got too much, a few, probably a great many have enough, a great many more simply haven't got enough.
Find something within the cultures that don't have enough, that you want. That's not necessarily a prime resource, that doesn't eat up their life and doesn't eat up their time. Find something that you find value to that you never gave a value to before. It could even be a song. And I don't mean to sound idealistic, but you have to find new things within these other places that we've excluded all these years from participating in our rich life. Find something they've got that is of a value to us that does not fuck up their whole life. My major problem is the fact that we cannot figure out why we're giving this money to other places besides the fact of how wonderful we are. Well, we ain't wonderful. We didn't get the money in a wonderful way. And if we don't find some way, manner, or form to give a dignity, a value, of function to these other people, it's going to go on forever.
To proceed in planning the economy on the basis of 1 year short-term balance sheets of companies is obviously stupid, but it's obviously stupid already. To destroy millions of years of evolution in cutting down rainforests so that they can produce short-term gains for cattle barons over a few years. And it looks good on their balance sheets and on their books, but if you had some kind of global bookkeeping, then this loss of biological diversity, the loss of these forests would... But it doesn't show up as an asset, you see. There's no way of quantifying the money value of the Amazonian tropics and of all the thousands of species that are there. I think there'd have to be a way of developing a new kind of economics. I don't think we can go along with the old kind of economics and have these new ideas make much sense.
And if they didn't think they were going to get something out of it and they're sitting in that audience, they're fools. That's what they're there for.
And what do you think they might get out of it?
What do you think they might get out of it? Fortunes are made by realizing that the perceptions of an object, the perceptions of a material have changed within a particular society. That's how fortunes are made in a capitalist society. They built rules that make them live within a society that doesn't allow them to think certain things. They're going to be confronted by a situation where people get paid to think what they're not supposed to think. People get paid to take that chance of dropping into madness. They can't do it. They can't even have an opinion about what a new cut of skirt looks like. It all depends upon who it's on, not what it is. A very great American writer, Paul Bowles, spent the majority of his adult life in North Africa, collecting Berber stories and collecting many, many stories of the region. Those stories, when published, of course, he would share with whoever was telling him the story and things. We can, in a sense, change our value structure. What is it that we get from being alive? Not as an antique, not as a living relic, because all the stories we find are all stories about transitions within their culture. And transition is a modernist movement. It continues on.
there are a number of countries in the world which have committed what is tantamount to national suicide themselves. And I would like to point out, in addition to the example of China under Mao in the late 60s, Burma, which is inherently a very wealthy country, which has ruined itself. Argentina, which at the turn of the century was an extraordinarily rich country, which has gone right down the drain. Current president is trying to rescue them. And the Sudan, where I had personal experience in 1984 and 1985, the Sudan is potentially richer than Saudi Arabia. It has oil, it has very rich agricultural land, it has gold and other resources, but due to civil war, everything is absolutely stopped, and the incredible inertia which the Sudanese are brilliant at just cannot be overcome.
I just don't think we've worked out ways of bridging how these new ideas would fit with the corporate world. Obviously, one ideal, which is already perfectly apparent to many people, is that the development of the Earth should be sustainable. We should think not just 3 years ahead or 5 years ahead, but 100 or 200 years ahead. And when we do that, I think we'd see a very different way of planning what we do. But most people don't want to, or haven't wanted to think so far ahead. And it'll involve a whole new change of perspective, a whole new way of thinking. But I think many of these changes that are needed can be seen right now, even before science gets around to changing its view of the world. I mean, there's a new scientific worldview emerging, but I think, in a sense, the ecological and the environmental problems are leading rather than following the change in worldview in science. I think it's the general social and economic problems that we're in that are making us more ready to think about challenging the basis of our scientific ideas.
We go from a product industry to a service industry. For the products, we had this material development and we've brought it very far. But for the service industry, we need mental development. And this is, I think, something that other cultures can provide us with. I would think, get the best from the Indians, the Tibetans, the Aborigines, wherever. Get the best and work with it.
The business community here knows that ideas are as much a commodity as a piece of steel. There's no question about that. We've reached that point in our existence. I was suggesting that perhaps there was something else of value that we had not yet dealt with. I don't know what it is, but I do know that if we continue to go along the line that we're going on of trying to build a factory, trying to do this is all really very nice, very well-meaning, and it works on a small level, but it's not going to change the basic problem. We're again finding ourselves in the same problem, each panel successively. We don't escape this problem. The house has many mansions, but they're all built the same way.
If cultures are more than just folklore, which we can reasonably tolerate, we have to examine one underlying very important and difficult assumption indeed, which has also direct consequences for economy. If 100 years ago, hardly anybody in this city probably would have doubted that, well, Christianity is universal, or at least God, in the most broader sense, is universal value. We are now accepting that science is universal. And this is a very difficult question to answer. But I think we should put the question. And I am for one inclined to think that science is neither neutral, can be positive or negative, nor universal. And thus, if we want to have an economy valid for the entire world, even this scientific structure has to be called into question in the most candid way of the way. You see, 2 and 2 are 4 only when 2 and 2 mean nothing. Because the moment that I apply, the thing becomes problematic. So that this is an underlying assumption. This doesn't mean that science is not valid. This doesn't mean that science has not a place a role to perform. But perhaps in this globality we are all asking for, we may be starting with parameters which are not fit to the immensity of the problem which confronts all of us. Fortunately, none of us have solutions. But if we put the finger on the real problems, we may be much more realistic in approaching them, not only with more respect, we all have respect, but with much more realism.
Thank you.
Here, here.
We only have a little part of the total reality, and the total or the totality of real science is far and far bigger than we can cover with a little teeny weeny bit of our present science. That opens also the gate to appreciate wisdom and maybe science and other cultures which are far behind our own capacity to imagine. And that also might diminish our own arrogance, because we walk in and say, well, I'll explain you how atomic energy works. We don't understand anything about atomic energy. We think we understand something about it.
So this mania for development, which we've exported to the whole world, which has brought in its train secular education, technological progress, modern economic systems, has destabilized the whole world economy and destabilized most societies in the world as well. So in a sense, we've created an unstable situation throughout the world. It's difficult to see quite how to get back to a more stable one. I mean, we've unleashed forces which we now don't understand, and the mechanistic worldview is part of that unleashing process. It's given people permission to think of the earth as just something to be used for monetary gain. And it's difficult to change attitudes back again. What it does is creates a split in us, and it creates a split all around the world.
Do you not think that we adopt, us Westerners, a very patronizing attitude towards the nations we call the third world, instead of putting our own countries in order first, and then, like the phrase of the Jesuits, do as I say, not as I do, and then they would do as we do, not as we say. Let's put our own houses in order first.
I think that what you said is absolutely correct, and I think that's what Wiener's trying to say all the time. And I would suggest that we understand the real meaning of the name of our symposium. Art means science and spirituality in a changing economy, and trying to go beyond ideology. Ideology is something that is absent here. That's why I said in the very beginning, I don't think any of the existing systems is exactly adequate for the future.
I don't think that science is universal. I think the language of science might be universal. The models that science develops are universal. But science itself, I think, is not universal. What is universal, I think, is the natural reality. And what science tries to do, and I think also art and economy, maybe not spirituality, is to perceive reality, to develop a model which is a perception of reality, but it is not the reality.
You know very well, just as I do, that what gets done is what gets funded. If you don't get funding, you don't do research, and funding, of course, is determined by values, and most of it is military. You know, in the United States, 76%. And to change this exponential growth of science is very well possible and very easy just by changing the funding structure and making it more democratic, and that's what we'll have to do.
Human mankind, and especially people in the economic sector, are so intelligent that they have exchanged the soldiers from the war and pre-war and put in its place the debt of the foreign countries, the developing countries. They don't need anymore the armory. They don't need anymore to send in their own people who get killed in uprisings. But what they've done, they've found out a system whereby you can put money in a certain country and then blackmail them.
I think what he said is quite true. That is to say that There are many other forms of pressure being made by Western countries on developing countries. Bribery. Corruption. It's one of the most important things which makes the people work, the world working for the time being. It's quite true. It's one of the major problems, and this is why I think it's very important that we bring more ethics in our life.
I think that the very fact that connections are being made between art, science, economics, and other realms is important, and it may help to create a context in which the changes will happen. I doubt if the changes would happen right there at the conference. One can very rarely program the emergence of new syntheses or new paradigms. One can create conditions that might help them to happen. And my own view, though, is that we won't have a new world order just through art, science, and economics, which are secular activities, and all of them can be pursued in the absence of any sense of a mythic and a spiritual dimension of things. So I think that the only chance for new integration will be one that includes the spiritual and the mythological.
And I explain that as making the impossible possible in art. 8 is making the impossible possible, 6 is art. And art meets science and spirituality, the changing economy, I think, is an impossibility in art.
I will always go to the east and to the nature, to the extreme situations like living in the desert or spending time with Tibetans or Aborigines, or go to Micronesia. And there I will get the energy and ideas for the art. And then I will come to the Western society and I will serve like a bridge.
Modern physics and modern science in general lead us to a worldview which is profoundly ecological. Ecological in the sense that it takes into account of the fundamental interconnectedness and interdependence of all phenomena, and of the fact that we are embedded in larger systems. We are embedded in the cyclical processes of nature.
I don't know any scientist which has scientific tools to understand the understanding, to go beyond the object, to deal with the subject in a non-objectifiable way.
You probably know that the Taoist expression for evil is that evil exists because there's goodness. And that means that there's dualism. If you can bring the dualism back to one, which you can also call integrity. Integrity is a very interesting word because it means wholeness.
Although the very existence of mankind is at stake, anything goes, so nobody actually does anything, states Raymond Panikkar, Catholic priest and Hindu scholar. He plays the game, but doesn't abide by the rules. he spends 6 months of the year writing at his home in the Catalan mountains near Barcelona. Clinging to the mechanistic worldview of Newton and Descartes has brought us perilously close to destruction, warns Fritjof Capra, theoretical high-energy physicist. We are at a turning point in all aspects of our culture. The paradigm shift toward a systemic worldview is crucial because without it there will be no future. Marina Abramovic draws strength from nature and ancient cultures. Her quest turned into a personal investigation of physical limits and mental potential as she attempts to gain control of her body and mind to actually transcend matter through her performances and other works of art.
So, since we now need a new perception of reality, it is very important to find the most creative ways of expressing this new perception and the most persuasive and convincing ways.
This is the only one is Nikola Tesla, who was busy about magnetic fields, who was busy about anti-gravitation, who was busy about energy fields. I mean, and he have incredible visions that every object and every human being and every plant and anything on this planet have his own wavelengths or frequencies. And he talked about idea of parallel worlds. That actually in this world we live in many, many parallel worlds, but we only can communicate with our own world with the objects who are with the same wavelengths. And if it's not same wavelengths, we actually everything else is invisible. So when we talk about spirituality, the people talk about this invisible world. Well, we don't have the proof because it's not physical, but exists. But now scientists are discovering that this actually invisible world exists. There are hundreds of parallel worlds. And I'm fascinated about the idea of being in this space, and just by changing my wavelength, I disappear from in the front of your eyes, and I reappear in the same room, but with in another order, with another setup. I mean, this is could be incredible to work with a scientist and artist together and make such things possible. I can say about art is like breathing. You must breathe to live. As Brancusi said once, and I always repeat this sentence because it's essential for my ideas about art, is that it's not important what are you doing, what form what you're doing takes. It can be painting, installation, sculpture, performance, or whatever. You also sit in the bank and sign the checks. What is important is from which state of mind you are doing what you are doing. Somebody said, let's get back to nature, but how? Once I was on the train sitting with the rabbi and the one very old man, we discussed some things, and this old man said, what you're doing? And he said, I'm for 40 years working in a crematorium, just burning the bodies. And we had very interesting conversation. In the end, he said me something that really, really strikes me. He said, 40 years ago, to burn the human body in crematorium, you need 125 degrees. These days, you need 715 because of chemicals in our body who increase. I mean, this is a fact. So this is our house inside. So now, to come back to this less is more, what we need is to empty our house That's what we need.
To me, ecology is the meeting ground of all these endeavors. Abramovich says that she wants to clean the body, and this is her main emphasis. Now, ecology at the deepest level is an identification of the earth household with the self. It's this spiritual link between the self and the cosmos, and therefore cleaning the body becomes then also cleaning the earth household. And this experience of connectedness, of belonging to the cosmos, of being embedded in the cosmos is the very essence of spiritual or religious experience. So at the deepest level, ecology is spiritual, and ecology, of course, is the very necessary and required context now for economics. The reason that our economics fails, the reason that economists don't understand the economy, are not able to solve economic problems, is that they lack an ecological context. That's what crucially must be introduced. So ecology is really the meeting ground.
What I am concerned with is that the framework in which we work, to me, the period of reformation is over. We have to head towards a period of transformation, metamorphosis, to substitute the very word development. Development is still, in the best sense of the word, crypto-colonialism. Because you say development, sustainable, not sustainable, good, bad, slowly, but the very concept of development has a very particular anthropology. That the meaning of life is to develop in one way or another. And then we call peoples on the way to development. What if we were to translate and accuse me then on the other side that we said awakening instead of development? Or realization. We have been believing for too long that our culture, which is the predominant one, which is great, it's enormous, it's fantastic, is the only one and can provide the solution and the models for the world predicament today.
Are we talking about global interdependence, global partnership, or are we talking about global exploitation? And most economic policies and most business policies today, as we know, are more in the direction of global exploitation than global partnership. So there needs to be a shift in values together with the shift in thinking. If the thinking shifts to global awareness with the purpose of exploiting the natural world and the peoples of the world as it is today, then globalization is a curse. But if it shifts to the values of global partnership and on global interdependence, then it's a blessing. But growth in the living world doesn't mean just expansion. It means, say, in a human being, development to maturity. It means also inner growth. So growth needs to be qualified. You know, Exxon made a huge profit from that oil spill. The GNP of Alaska rose sharply after the oil spill, but that's not sustainable growth. That's destructive growth.
Growth and cancer. I have a hypothesis which at least does not need the billions of dollars for cancer research, which our present day loss of homeostasis, as the medical doctors would say, in our individual organisms is simply a reflection in our microcosmos of what in the macrocosm is going. Our civilization has lost homeostasis, has lost the sense of the optimum and goes for the maximum. Let us, for instance, when he spoke of the breaking of the rhythms, today, in order to cultivate scientifically, with all the machinery we need, 1 acre of rice, we need an input of 15 irrecuperable units of energy higher than the amount of calories that that acre of rice is going to yield if the harvest is optimal. No wonder then that the poor people get poorer and the richer people get richer.
Or as my friend Hazel Henderson says, nothing fails like success.
And there is another beautiful word translated from Tibetan, I don't know the Tibetan, but is in English is called suchness. And suchness is something that can be described as the emptiness, but the full emptiness. So there are all these moments, how to get there. The one way of, when he said, to light travel, let's go to desert. But why desert? Because I think the desert is the place where there's less thing happening. It's just you and your mind. In old days you say the Jesus, the Moses, the Muhammad, everybody went to desert like nobody, and they came back as a somebody. I mean, there must be something in this desert. Because the desert is the hardest place to go. This is the place when you are really confronted with yourself.
In fact, I think meditation is needed just because we live an artificial life, because we can't be in that unspoiled nature where we have that contact with nature, with the cosmos. We miss that in our artificial life. But in meditation, we can nevertheless still find the source of our being. And that's so important.
Would we not need meditation also if we have a natural life? I think as well.
Probably less, because then living in nature is already a kind of meditation.
And that's a tragedy, that living in an artificial world prevents to live in this meditative aspect, and then we have this kind of cultural schizophrenia, which we need meditation to compensate. And I think that our challenge is how to introduce intrinsically that dimension of depth in economy, art, everywhere. That's the challenge.
I don't think that everybody needs to go to the desert to meditate, but I'm certainly glad that she goes to the desert to meditate, because these are people who go very far in a certain direction.
If you can imagine somebody of 22 years old in Yugoslavia get naked in front of 500 people outside and cut the communist star on his stomach with a razor plate. I mean, I think I create more shocks than I experience shocks.
You personally, as a human being who happens to be a physicist, who operates on that level, how do you see fear in operating on our planet?
All right. Well, I see that fear is a main stumbling block that prevents us from going through the change of thinking and change of values that I believe are absolutely crucial to save the world. And I think it should be taken very seriously, because what we are talking about is a change of paradigms that begins and has to begin by questioning everything that went on before, questioning all the ideas, all the values, all the perceptions that you have had in the past. It doesn't mean that you need to throw everything away. You need to throw some things away and others you keep and others you modify, but you need to question everything. And that is, of course, very threatening. And as human beings, we are afraid of change, and we are reluctant to change anyway. Even small changes like, going to a different restaurant or ordering something different in the same restaurant. We don't like to do that. But this radical shift of questioning everything that went on before means essentially questioning your existence. And so it's an existential fear. And we can talk about how to overcome it or how to help people overcome it. And I think the community plays a tremendous role, that we need to build a community of people who have gone through the process and then can support others in going through it. But the fear has to be taken seriously. When I do seminars for managers, I always say this is no joking matter. And I understand very well that in addition to all the constraints that working in a company brings with it, there is this very serious existential fear that we need to acknowledge.
I had not hereby, was not prepared, 100 different names in Sanskrit classical language for what we called fear. Angst, tremblement, doubt, hesitation, insecurity, threat, anxiety, which is one of the Sanskrit words for sin. So we should learn to begin to make this kind of discernment. Not all fear can be put on one single bag. When I want to irritate Christian theologians, I say the whole Christian and Jewish theology is nothing but the sanctification of the principle of property. There are many gods, but I'm your God. There are many wives, but she's your wife. There are many cows, but that's not your neighbor's cow. The principle of property is the pivot of a certain type of civilization. Fear emerges out of that property. I have something to lose because I possess knowledge, riches, whatever. So fear is linked with that primacy, and I should be very careful, primacy of the principle of property as guiding our world understanding. One thing I'm certain, you become what you hate. So, hate against the evil, écraser l'infâme, does not work. Which means that in our modern society, we have very little ways of facing evil except violence, crushing the opponent, the enemy. And I think that we should learn, after 8,000 years of human history, and I have studied the 5,000 peace treaties in the world, one whole seminar on this alone, which is an extraordinary document to human wisdom and human stupidity. This is the war which shall end all wars. That's déjà vu. Déjà vu. Arsubanipal had said that in 500, not BC. Now it's one democracy, one science, one technology, one way of living the world and seeing the things because we have these wonderful achievements.
I feel very strongly that this is going to be a critical decade, that the survival of humanity and of the planet are at stake. We are faced today with a whole series of very alarming problems that threaten the biosphere in many ways and which soon will be irreversible. And yet there are solutions, some of them even simple. but they all require a radical shift in our thinking, in our values, in our practices, in the ways we live. A shift that we have discussed throughout this week, from fragmentation to wholeness, from quantity to quality, and a shift of emphasis, mind you, not that we want to give up quantity altogether, but a shift of emphasis from quantity to quality, from growth to sustainability, from domination to partnership. Now, given this fact that we need this radical shift at a time where it's almost too late, given the fact that our crisis is largely a crisis of perception, it seems to me what we need most is a massive campaign of public education.
Like evolution, everything is changing all the time, and our Earth is changing, and we are changing, and we are all the time. Everything is to do with relationships. Take another relationship to our galaxy, another relationship to another planet, another relationship, the man to man. I think the only thing what I wish really that the man should start be conscious about his mind and his possibility as a human being, and really use his body and use these possibilities. And he should start immediately, now. Tomorrow is too late, but really now. And then hopefully that we can die with that knowledge.
Der Wille ist das Ursein. That the primordial being is will. That, I think, is the Western dogma. And then everything has to be on willpower, and I even want to be creative. And by this, I kill creativity. Creativity has to search like the mushrooms. Creativity is that thing which has to be so spontaneous, so natural, so flowing without taking it for granted, that any kind of will interfering, intention, being inside the effort to be creative kills creativity itself. The first thing in which you enter into contact with the divine is beauty. Without the sensitivity, the openness to beauty, to form, to shape, to what the Greek called the morphe, without that kind of thing, life is boring. My main task is to make of that portion of reality, this myself, to make that something harmonious, beautiful, genuine, and authentic. If that part of portion of the universe in which I have a certain power, I succeed in transforming it as I would like to be, that has a contagion power by itself to the others. To walk in beauty is that extraordinary expression of the American Indians. To live means to walk in beauty.
you.